All right, fact check this podcast as my wife rummages around in the freezer behind us trying to get stuff situated.
Hi, Stephanie.
Pete says hi. She said hey.
Kelly says hi.
Kelly says hi too. Okay, dear. We're having turkey. All right.
Cool.
I have too many freezers completely packed full of food and stuff, so we're trying to figure out where we're putting everything as we're grabbing stuff. Anyway, today we are going to talk about. It's been a wild weekend already, and it just got started. Today we're going to talk about World War One, or the aftermath of that, more specifically. And like we were kind of talking about before the show, I feel like historically, World War One is a big reason why we live in the world we do. And there was a lot of stuff that happened that built up to World War One from, like you were saying, like I was really thinking like from the Civil War up to that point, but really like you were saying in our text conversations, like it goes even further back. It goes all the way back to like early 1800s. A lot of stuff builds and culminates to getting us to World War One, and then it happens, and then there's a whole bunch of stuff that happens after that then ultimately leads to the world that we live in today. Like, so kind of, we're going to summarize some of the build up to, because there's a whole lot of conversation to be had there, and we're really going to focus on what happened after that led to World War II and why that's all really important in the world we live in today. So first, introduce yourself. I mean, everybody who's watching this already knows, but introduce yourself nonetheless, and then kind of lead us in where you think would be a good jumping off point.
Sure. Quiñones show, PeteSubstack.com. So check it out. So, World War One. Really, the way I see it, you can get down into the minutia of it, and you can, first thing I would say is Germany gets blamed for the war, for starting the war. It's really Russia that starts the war. I have a series on World War One with Thomas 777. To explain that right now we'd be here hours. You can go, the series is there. Basically, what I think happened, one of the main reasons World War One happened was the remaining monarchies, especially like the Habsburg monarchy, just people in control, people in power did not want monarchies to exist anymore. And if they were going to exist, they were going to be parliamentary monarchies where the monarch in Britain is just basically a figurehead, that kind of thing. They wanted to see, well, there was two factions. One faction wanted to see like democracy. The other faction wanted to see Bolshevism. And actually both factions won. So we got Bolshevism and we got democracy, or managerialism, as Burnham would come to call it in 1940. So you basically set it up so that you can assassinate somebody like Archduke Ferdinand of Austria. That's a member of the Habsburg family. There's going to have to be a reprisal, and it just drags all these people into this war. And the United States stayed out of it until 1917. Germany was absolutely crushing everyone, and just like in World War II, until the United States gets involved, Germany was the clear winner and going to be the clear victor. And what it came down to, what it looks like happened, is ethnic animosity towards the German people, the Austrian people, the Prussian people, the people of that line, that ethnos. there was so much animosity towards them that even at the end of the war, they have to sign the Treaty of Versailles. They don't have to sign the Treaty of Versailles, but the Weimar government did sign the Treaty of Versailles. And basically what that did was it put all the blame on Germany. So just to go to my notes, I just have a couple notes here on that. Um, Basically what the Treaty of Versailles does is it takes territory away from Germany, depriving it of valuable industrial and agricultural income. Um, Italy got a lot of the south. To the east, Czech Czech got a lot of the property, and they did as much as they could to, and especially the Czech when it comes to Austria, the land of Austria, they did as much as they could to make the Germans' lives a living hell, the Austrians, the Prussians, living hell. We'll get back to that. Then there's Article 231, and that's the war guilt clause that blames Germany and her allies for starting the war. And even though, Germany can't really honestly be said to start the war, the Weimar government signed it, and this led to a lot of feelings of humiliation and anger amongst the people, a very proud Prussian people. Probably the thing that people most know from the Treaty of Versailles is that Germany had to pay reparations to the tune of, and this is in that time's numbers, 6.6 billion pounds. And what this basically did was it ensured that Germany, if they had to pay that, Germany's economy would never recover. They also had to cut their armed forces greatly. So, by the Weimar government signing this, the people, a lot of the people, were angered by this. I mean, just so you had terms that were called like the November criminals or the stab in the back. And this is a phrase that Hitler uses in a lot of his speeches. And it also basically opens up Germany to hostile takeover by any kind of force within or without that could make its way into Germany. And due to the war and due to growing due to the Bolshevik Revolution and its success in 1917, on the battlefield, a lot of Germans, a lot of people were hearing about Bolshevism and what it was doing for people, all lies. And they mostly what they heard is that the people who were in charge were getting punished, and they thought, oh well, if we embrace this, then we can punish the people who sent us to this war and did this and that. And so you had also a huge rise in communism and Bolshevism within Germany from Germans, and also a lot pouring over the border from without. In her incredible diary, Blockade, Anna Eisenmenger, who was she was just a middle class housewife, maybe a little upper middle class in Vienna. After during the war and after the war, she said that when she had traveled north and there were basically bands of bandits robbing farms and burning towns, she clearly said that they did not have German faces. They did not have Austrian faces. And she was an Austrian, but she considered herself a German. So it opened itself up to a lot. It basically, what it did was it made Germany vulnerable, and also made it so that if people didn't outright die from the consequences of the Treaty of Versailles and the subsequent food blockade that was instituted against Germany and Austria, but Austria really got hit by that hard. That the people who were, in the blockade diary, she talks about how the children, her grandchildren are growing up stunted growth, and they're weak, and it's basically trying to raise up a generation. If these kids survive, they're not going to be strong, and they're going to be unhealthy and probably not live a very long life. So I'll stop right there, and you can keep going.
Okay, yeah. So, and all of this leads to the rise of National Socialism and everything else. But there's other steps that get taken along the way. But this is like what kind of kicks this off. But okay, so let's back up a little bit. You said that it Germany didn't have to sign this. This was done by Weimar. And what was because all of this seems a little excessive. What was the justification for all of this excessive level of punishment that was put on Germany by the I guess the Allied forces, or whatever you want to call them, that ultimately won thanks to the U.S. involvement? And this is another one of those history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. Where if you look at and the Roman Empire and stuff like that is something that I've gotten really hung up on, even in high school, and then as other people have started to get really into it, that's caused me to get back into it now as an adult and refresh on stuff. But when you look at the rise of Julius Caesar and the fall of the Roman Republic, the Roman Senate did a lot of stuff to Julius Caesar that put him in a similar position as what all of the restrictions and impositions and everything that were put on Germany, that ends up just pushing them to a point where somebody rises up and is like, all right, fuck this. That's kind of what the Senate did to Caesar as he gained power. And so seeing the German power doing all of this to try to stamp that out just ended up bringing it back even stronger later on once National Socialism kind of really took hold. What was and so in the Roman situation, the justification for that was the Senate was scared of Caesar's power and influence because he was very popular. His soldiers loved him, everybody loved him. He also so they stripped him of his governorships, they stripped him of everything. They levied heavy fines on him, all kinds of stuff, with really no justification for doing that. So what was the other than to keep him from taking too much power? So what was the justification for all of this, what seems excessive punishment that was being put on Germany? Because like you were saying, when you look at that stuff, this is clearly a death knell. They are without explicitly saying we are trying to kill you off, they were trying to kill them off with all of this stuff.
Well, I mean, right from the start, they were blamed for the war. Also, there were all these rumors. Would you be surprised to find out that there were rumors that the Kaiser had human factories where they were converting humans into biofuel and things it was just all these rumors about Germany doing all these things. And there was a lot of propaganda about how the people of Germany supported all of this, and that they, if they would support all of this, tell me if this sounds familiar at all. If they would support all of this, then they equally have to be taken care of. In the blockade diary, at one point she talks to a newspaper person she knows, and she's asking about will the French mothers do anything for us? My husband's dead. I have a son who's dead. I have a son who's blind. I have a son who's crippled. I have young children here who can't take care of themselves. We have no access to food. will these French mothers do anything for us? Let's start some kind of campaign to appeal to them. And they said that French mothers are writing letters in the newspapers saying that they hope that every Austrian man, woman, and child dies. So they bought into this, this propaganda about Germany doing all these evil things during the war, starting the war, and all this. And something that's very interesting that you find out from that diary that no one wants to talk about. If you've ever heard of the Save the Children Foundation, the Save the Children Foundation was started in after World War I to help Austrian women and children, because they were that bad off, and many days the whole families were down to 200 calories. So propaganda does a lot to convince the masses. Jacques Ellul basically said that you can't have a people within a state unless there's propaganda. That propaganda is what fuels the state, is what keeps the people together, is what makes the people all think alike. And if you can convince enough people and you can convince a nation that Prussia started the war, Prussia did horrific things during the war, and all they wanted to do was kill French people, well, then you'll have French mothers saying that they hope that Austrian mothers and their children, starve to death. So, that's a lot of it.
What would you say was the deciding factor that got the U.S. to enter and turn the tides of the war? And then what was the U.S.'s part in the post-war kind of transition that Europe saw and went through?
Well, people will say that it was just British officials lobbying the Wilson White House hard enough to make them decide to go to war. Because remember, he ran for re-election in 1916 and saying there was no way the United States was getting in this war. What's come out since then is that Lord Rothschild and certain other elements in that cadre went to the British war leaders and told them that if you give us Jerusalem, if you give us the land of Palestine, we will convince the United States, the White House, to go into war, to join the war effort. And when you consider people like Mandel House, who was just basically owned by Rothschild interests, and he was basically, Wilson pretty much did anything that he said. It was pretty much a done deal at that point. So, yeah, it was just basically horse trading. It's like, we have the Zionist project and we need Palestine in order to do it. Give us Palestine, allow us to start moving there, and we'll get the United States into the war. And they did. So it seems like that's how the United States got involved. After the war, at least publicly, from everything I've read, is that the Wilson tried his best to make sure that Austria and Germany weren't treated the way they were. But at that point, it seems like Wilson at one point had a stroke before he left office, and his wife was running the show. And if his wife's running the show, it's going to be his advisors too. And I don't think that she and the advisors had any interest in lightening up on the blockade, especially the blockade upon Austria. And they were certainly not going to do anything to lift a hand to stop the revolutionary violence that was happening in Weimar.
So let's take it from there. How does Weimar play into it from this point, and why is the power, I don't know if that's the right word, but the power that Weimar kind of has at this time going forward, how is that important in kind of how Europe and especially Germany end up getting shaped over the next 20 years or so, 10 to 15 years, I guess would be a more accurate timeline.
Well, it pretty much starts out pretty quick. Once they signed the Treaty of Versailles, they were opposed from the left and the right. So in January 1919, the Weimar government and their president was Friedrich Ebert. He was a social democrat. He was challenged by a group of revolutionaries called the Spartacists. And the Spartacists were communists, and they wanted Germany to be run by the working class. They thought that power and wealth should be shared equally among the population. And they wanted to replicate the Russian Revolution in 1917. And what they wanted to do was, their plan was to overthrow the central government, establish Soviets in place of the central government in German towns and cities, and they were willing to use the most violent methods that possible. So they were led by someone you may not have heard of, Karl Liebknecht, and someone you probably have heard of, Rosa Luxemburg. So in January 1919, 50,000 workers go on strike and demonstrate in the center of Berlin. Demonstration is taken over by Spartacist leadership. Newspaper communication buildings are seized, exactly what they did in Petrograd in 1917 in Russia. A lot of the protesters basically thought that they were there for something to change. And when they saw that there was actually a lack of planning, what they thought a lack of planning by the Spartacists, they left. So the government, had moved to Weimar to avoid the violence employed by avoid the violence. So they employed the Freikorps to put down the rising. And the Freikorps were ex-army soldiers who hated the communists. They killed over 100 workers. That became known as the Bloody Week. In the aftermath, Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg were arrested and executed. And the communists and many of the German working class developed a hatred of the Social Democrats. So, then you start seeing nationalist opposition rising. March 1920, right-wing nationalist Wolfgang Kapp, he took over Berlin. The army refused to attack him. He was only defeated when the workers in Berlin went on strike. And, you had nationalist terrorists that assassinated 356 government politicians, including the foreign minister and the former finance minister. The judges, many of whom preferred the Kaiser government, consistently gave these terrorists light sentences or let them go. So both left and right were deeply suspicious of each other. I mean, the country was basically split down the middle. So, you can see what this leads to. You do not have order. You do not have a government. And it is when you take into consideration that they still have to pay back $6.6 billion at this point, which I've forgotten to look up how much that was in today's dollars. But, I mean, it's a perfect, you're talking about a perfect climate for for some kind of revolutionary force to rise up. And what you see you have the Communist Party Germany, and you have the National Socialist Party Germany, and both of them, National Socialist Party Deutschland, you see them on the rise, and they are, they're rivals to try to get control of this government. And some people play both sides. Famously, Goebbels played both sides. He hung out with a lot of the KPD. But this was what basically the Treaty of Versailles, in my opinion, was to not only allow for the devastation of the people health-wise and to kill many people, but it was also to allow the revolutionary forces that had taken over in Russia to be able to take over in Germany and in Austria, and be able to push. Now you're not only in Germany, now you have a foothold on the continent. So when they go to make their plan to take all of Europe, they now they have basically what is the biggest industrial base in Germany, in Europe. What would come to be that they wouldn't be able to build that on their own. So yeah, that's just it's a horror show. It just leaves it leaves so much. People say, "Oh, how did Hitler come to power?" Well, I mean, he's just got to be the baddest MFer on the block, he could take over.
6.6 billion in today's dollars is about 120 billion. That is.
Yeah, and according to E. Michael Jones, the inflation that you hear about in Weimar, that was done on purpose to pay off that debt. So, I mean, that's what happens when you have a debt that if you control a government, you control a printing press, and you have a debt that you can't pay off, you can do one of two things. You can renege on it, which they were in no position to do, or you can just print it. And that's what it appears that's what they did.
So on that, and we talked about this in the book burning episode as well, like some of this stuff. But so what's going on in Weimar is what ends up leading to the rise of National Socialism, and which brings along Hitler and everything else. Let's talk about maybe connecting some of the dots. Okay, so you were talking about before the show, if it had just ended, like if the war had just ended, then it would, then it would have been a whole lot less. But everything that happened afterwards really sets up what ends up happening, 20, 30 years later, what ends up happening even now. Like we are still feeling the effects of not just the war ending, but everything that was put into place after the war ended.
Well, I mean, think about it. When you study history, what happens after a war? People just go home. I mean, that's what they do. That's what they did. War is people, talk about how terrible monarchies were and everything. But, monarchical wars, for the most part, until you start getting into like Spain's golden age, or just like a cousin fighting against a cousin for a piece of land or for a throne or something like that. And most of the time the king would have to hire soldiers to do it. So he would have to pay them, and he would have to borrow money, and money was gold back then. So you're basically limited in what you can do, because you can't just print money. And when you look at the United States gets involved in 1917. Well, what happened in 1913? You had the Federal Reserve opened up. So there was, now you saw it really after the American Civil War between the states, the recent unpleasantness, the how the North treated the South. They tried to do the same thing. They tried to kill them. I just did an episode with George Bagby talking about the aftermath of Reconstruction and how, you know, there were black-owned newspapers in Louisiana that were calling for the extermination of the white population, and that wasn't by accident. And you have to remember, the North won, and the North, what the war did was we basically adopted an ideology. This is who we're going to be from now on. You know, what happens 30 years later? 30 years later, you start having your wars for conquest. Philippines, places like that. What does the Philippines have to do with the United States? Shouldn't have anything to do with the United States. So when World War I rolls around, and the whole ideology of punish your enemies after you beat them on the battlefield has basically grown. Has, you know, people are looking at that. People are becoming more ideological. People are, I don't know how to describe it. It's a very sick spirit of the age. And if anybody has a warrior code, you know, the warrior code is you don't humiliate your enemy unless you plan on killing them. You don't humiliate him and send him home. He's going to come back for you. And ever since then, this, you know, the American Civil War, and especially since World War I, there's this thing that just didn't exist before that, called war guilt. And war guilt is not a thing. You know, if you believe in God, if you believe in His providence, then, you know, you believe that war just is going to happen. There's really nothing you can do. It's going to happen. And to put the blame on and to seek to punish, I mean, I could even see wanting to punish the perpetrators, say the officers, the leadership. But, you know, in doing that, all you're doing is you're creating chaos within the country. But blaming the people, that's new. And yeah, we still haven't lost that. You know, that's still with us. And, you know, you see it in Palestine right now. It's like you know, well, I mean, we don't care. These 2.3 million people are responsible for Hamas because they haven't killed them. You know, the whole thing about how American foreign policy is basically to try to starve the people or punish the people so much that they overthrow their government. Well, that doesn't seem to be working there. And so I want to say it starts with World War I, but really you see it more in the American Civil War, that the population, especially the population of and it's the population of the losing side, they have to be punished as well. And if that's something that you're going to do, especially from afar, you know, after World War II, they literally killed people. They literally lined up German citizens and killed them, starved them to death, put them into swamps and kept them there to die from exposure, things like that. If you're, you know, allowed a whole generation of German women to be raped by Russians, which is why a lot of Germans look Russian nowadays. I mean, after World War One, it was, a group rose up, multiple groups rose up, but one eventually is going to win. That was revolutionary, and that was revolutionary in its thinking, only that it was revolting against what had happened to it, what had happened to them. And now, after World War II, you have to take the punishment, and you can't fight back, or else you're a fascist, or you're a Nazi, or you're, the worst thing on the planet. If you think your life is if a government has declared war upon you, and that doesn't have to be them trying to starve you or them trying to kill you, it could be just that they change your whole culture to something that is completely foreign, then eventually something is going to happen, you would think, unless we are just at an evolutionary point where that's not going to happen. But yeah, I mean, it's very easy to see when you understand exactly how not only were the German and Austrian people felt like they were betrayed by their foreign enemies, but also by their domestic enemies, how things turned out the way that they did.
So what is the point, the big trigger point in this aftermath that really?
Well, good.
Okay, yeah. So what is like the big trigger point in this aftermath that really turns Germany around, where Hitler and the National Socialists do rise to power, where you do get that point where there's the breaking point that everybody's like, fuck this, enough is enough. Like that there is literally a war being waged on our very cultural identity, our very lives, our ability to feed ourselves, like everything. Like something's got to give, and now it's time. What would you say is like that breaking point, or was it just a slow burn culmination of everything?
Well, I think the fact that it was fairly lawless helped a lot, because it allowed you to be able to build your own army. Yeah, and that's what any revolutionary tendency has to be able to do, is they need to be able to build an army and not have the government crack down upon them. Yeah, and Hitler was also the National Socialists were, even though the Chancellor of Germany, especially Hindenburg, they weren't very powerful, and they really couldn't wield a lot of power. They never really cracked down upon them. After a certain point, they just stopped. And I think it was because, Hitler had the SA. He basically had revolutionary forces in the street that he could call upon. He had an army. He had a trained army. Most of these men fought in World War One. I mean, they knew how they killed. These weren't soft people complaining about Jews in government today. These are people who were screaming. I mean, they're not people screaming on the internet that if you disagree with them, you're a Jew. These are people who really understood what was happening politically, financially, everything related to the German culture, and they wanted to reinstitute that culture. And the fact that not only did he have his own you had your own private army, and you had your own basically jackboots to stomp your enemy, But he also realized that they were going to have to do this legitimately. They were going to have to run and get elected. And once they realized that they had that power, that they had the backing, Thomas 777 likes to say that Germans really weren't enamored with the National Socialists, but they loved Adolf Hitler. So even from a metaphysical kind of take, if you have millions of souls who are dedicated to one person, metaphysically, I think you can move mountains. You can make things happen. And I think Hitler knew that too. There were certain points. I remember reading about this one interview where I forget who it was who interviewed. I can't remember the guy's name. But he said he didn't feel like he was interviewing Adolf Hitler. He felt like he was interviewing the German people. Because Hitler was we. He was talking about the people. And I think that that was very powerful. And I think that a lot of people picked up on that. People who did not like Adolf Hitler, did not like Germans, did not want to see Germany become a superpower again. And I think that they saw that he was becoming a messianic figure. And really the only way to take down a messianic figure is to become demonic and attack it with everything you have. And the French, I don't think the French were even capable of that. I don't think the English weren't capable of that. But the Russians and the Americans sure were. I mean, the Soviets were. And I think once you decide to throw your lot in with Satan, you take on a lot of his power and a lot of his persona. And I think that was what eventually would give that cadre the ability to take down a messianic figure like that. I know we got ahead of ourselves there, but I got on a roll. So
I know. I mean, it also ties back in because in the aftermath of World War I, in the aftermath of the Civil War, you had the not just win, but summarily destroy everything about your opponent after you win. And like they took it even further after World War II. So and like you were saying earlier, like with the monarchical wars and stuff like that, everybody needs to get along afterwards, generally speaking. So the war happens, and when the war is over, a winner and a loser have been declared, and then now we've all got to get along. Like, you don't have room to put your opponent under heel and just continue to grind them to dust. That takes a certain kind of a special kind of evil to, especially in the U.S. following the Civil War, or in Europe, where those countries are all so close and so tightly tied together in everything that they do, to turn and just put the loser under heel and just grind them down like that, when you have to interact with them. Like, these are your neighbors, I really do think that the First World War and the Civil War are very similar in that, like, Europe is a small continent, And all of these countries are very tightly knit together, like the U.S. states. And whenever you have something like that, it takes a special level of, or a special kind of evil to want to just keep going even after you win. It's like, it's like the mercy rule in sports and stuff. And like I coached basketball, and I coached a homeschool league team, and we had some very good, very athletic kids, and we played against other homeschool league teams that had what you would expect from homeschool league players. And we would get up, and everybody on the team, like the boys on the team, would get mad at me when we'd get up by a certain level, and I'd start mixing up lineups and rotating people out and trying different stuff, and telling my point guard was, he was my floor general, and whatever I told him to do, he would do it without question. He was like the perfect point guard. And so, I'd have him pull back. I'd have him like slow it down. We'll try different stuff. And they'd all get mad. They'd be like, we can run it up on them. We can beat them by 80. I'm like, why? There is no benefit to just continuing to kick them in the teeth. We have to play them again later in the season. We're going to play them next year. We're going to play them the year after that. We have to see these people. Like, there's no good that comes from continuing to just kick them in the head over and over again. And sometime after the Civil War, nations lost that stop kicking them, or stop hitting him. He's already dead. Like they lost that, and I think it is something evil that came into these ruling entities that maybe in their foundations had not been there before. A loss of morality and principle and godliness, really.
Well, I mean, sure. Look what, just to give another example, when you look at 1936 to 1939 in Spain, you have the Spanish Civil War, and you have communists, anarchists, and they're all fighting under the Republican banner. And these were some of the most horrifying revolutionaries of all time, to the point where even through after the war up until 1959, I mean, it ends in 1939. In 1959, Franco was still tracking people down to try them for what they did. I mean, they killed over 6,000 clergy in the first 6 months of the war. I mean, just executing. I mean, just pulling people out of their homes and churches, and they're just executing people, taking them into graveyards, executing them on the side of the road, executing sons while their fathers are on the phone with them. And you realize that we've crossed over someplace that it doesn't seem like we can go back. And World War I, after especially the blockade, George Bagby said he's thinking about doing his own copy printing of Blockade, which would be great, because the only version we have now are the 8.5 by 11, like the size that comes from India, from biblio.com. So him doing one, and he said if he does it, he wants me to write the foreword. That'd be awesome. But when you look and you see that they're just basically being punished because they lost and for who they are, and you have to ask yourself, okay, what went wrong? Why? When I think about it, what I think about is I think about progressivism. And I think about how progressivism believes that they can improve man. That, man is born a clean slate, and it's only what their parents teach them and what teachers teach them is why they believe wrongly. And, under progressivism, to believe wrongly is to believe in God, is to have faith, is to care about your family more than anyone else, things like that. And it really, and the conclusion of that is, well, if somebody is not willing to change, if somebody can't change, if somebody is rebellious against that, and you want to have a world of people who are only in that mold, then you're going to have to start killing people en masse. And I think that that's what we started seeing. We started seeing, um, I don't know as much of it after, after the Civil War, after the war between the states, but that was definitely ideological differences. I mean, the culture of the North and the culture of the South were completely different cultures. So one wins, and then they have to destroy the other culture. And I think when you get to, but progressivism to me is just or I would say this, Bolshevism to me is just a more radical but honest version of progressivism. Is you are going to believe this and you are going to be this, or we kill you. And
with progressivism, they would love to kill you, but they'll settle for you bending the knee and doing whatever they say in the meantime.
sure,
They'll settle for you being fired and being removed from social media, losing all of your ability to make a living. They'll take killing you slowly over just putting you on a wall.
but when you look after World War II, what they had to do was they had to make sure the Germans weren't German anymore. So, Germany gets split, and you have the east part, you have the west part, and the east part is controlled by the Soviet Union, kind of. And you have the west part, which is basically controlled by the United States. It's controlled by the global American empire, the gay. It's controlled by by world Zionism, basically. And there's army bases there to make sure that they do not step out of line. And look at Germany now. Look at France now. Look at basically all of these countries. If if I believe that World War I was to basically destroy the monarchies of Europe, to destroy one-man rule, then I believe World War II was basically to destroy any kind of identity you have outside of your rulers, outside of the people who wield power over you. And these are people who, I believe that they import hordes into Europe to punish them, but I also believe that there are people who genuinely believe that these people coming, when they empty insane asylums and prisons in the Middle East and Africa, and they send them into Europe, that there are people who genuinely believe that this is what's good. This is what's going to make the world. This is how you break down whatever remains left of people's any kind of identity that they're holding on to, because now they have people surrounding them that don't look like them, don't talk like them, don't act like them. And they're convinced that these are Germans just like me. These are Swedes just like me. These are Frenchmen just like me. And if you can do that, then being a Swede and being a Frenchman and being a German ceases to mean anything. there's no meaning to it anymore. I struggle. I sometimes struggle with the term American because I don't even know what. I know what it used to mean. I don't know what it means anymore. And I think J.D. Vance talking about, the difference between a country and a government and a nation of people. I think that that's good. But I think that when you watch the reaction to it, even somebody, well, or maybe even especially somebody like Ben Shapiro, wasn't impressed.
That's why
wasn't impressed. Remember?
That's why I'm a hillbilly.
Remember, Ben Shapiro said he didn't care anything about the browning of America. He just cared what they believed in. And yeah, hillbilly's great. I still don't even know what my my relatives out in Western Pennsylvania call themselves in coal country.
I'd be willing to bet they call themselves hillbillies or something of that nature.
Yeah, but I mean, what this all came down to, and what started after World War I, maybe you can even trace it to the Civil War, the American Civil War, it's just a tearing down of who we are. It's a tearing down of not only, and they don't mind so much if we believe that we're some kind of individual. That doesn't bother them. It's when you have a group identity. And that's what these wars, I think, were fought for. I think that they were fought to destroy group identity. And, you look around the world, and of course, this is in the West. Japan still has a group identity. China still has a group identity, although there are factions in there. There are factions in every country, but they have a group identity, and they will have a group identity, especially if it comes to invaders. But when it comes to the West, well, that's not allowed. And if you still have countries like the Bosnias and the Croatias, they don't like that. They don't like that. They're willing to put up with it for now. But eventually they're going to come for them too. So
it's why progressivism has such a is so constantly waging war against the South, against Southerners, against rednecks and hillbillies and country folks, against rural America, because you still hold an identity. We are still country, and I'm from Kentucky, spent most of my life in Kentucky, lived in Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, now in Indiana. And everywhere I've been, everybody's a fucking redneck. And I fit in. The only place I've ever not fit was when I lived in Pennsylvania and worked in Jersey, right around Philly, Trenton area. I did not fit there. It was the most miserable year of my fucking life. My dad actually said my accent got stronger while I lived up there. Everybody was like, "Oh, you're gonna move up there and you're gonna start picking up that northern accent." Dad said my southern accent got stronger every time I would come home to visit. My brain was
revolting against
rejecting living up there to the point that I was becoming more redneck while I lived there. That's and there's no. It was awesome. I did enjoy living there for some of what it was, but there was no identity. There is no culture. It's not like the South. Everywhere in the South that I've lived, Arkansas, Mississippi, Tennessee, Kentucky, even we have a neighbor that all of his vehicles have a Confederate flag on the front bumper. It's fun and cool living here. I have discovered this is coal country, and coal country rednecks are a lot different than agriculture and farming country rednecks. I'm I'm a farm boy, and my wife is a coal is like her granddad worked in the coal mines and stuff. So we are both very country, but coal country and ag country are very different types of country, which is also
Mhm.
really cool and interesting because there are overlaps but huge differences as well. Anyway, that's a whole other culture and topic. But yeah, I mean, it's why there is still such a war of progressivism against rednecks because we have a culture, and you're not allowed to have that uh, since really since World War I, World War II. Like you have to that was kind of the establishment of everybody is going to have this globalist identity. That's it. You know, you don't get to have your own uh, group.
Yeah, yeah,
Anything
and
we
it's
missed?
not really. I don't think so. The just that I think when they looked at what they did after World War One to try and destroy Germany, and then Germany came back better than ever, and was just killing it in the 1930s technologically, and it built the Autobahn, which people forget is one of the most amazing feats of engineering at that time. And people went back to work. You know, they saw that they just didn't do enough. They didn't go far enough. And I think that's what World War II was. World War II was to say, we defeated you once. Here, we're going to defeat you for all time. And the only way we're going to be able to do this is, sure, we're going to starve and we're going to kill millions of you. But after that's done, and they did that after the war, after that's done, we're going to make sure that you never, ever consider yourselves to be Germans. You're never going to be proud Germans ever again. You'll just be Germans. And the war guilt that they felt that they were forced to feel after World War One. Imagine how much worse the war guilt was after World War II when they were told that they were responsible for 6 million lives, put to death in your country, and by your country, not in your country, but by your country. So by your people, your neighbors did this. Your neighbors were in the military and they did this. So yeah, not to get in any trouble on YouTube or anything like that, but yeah.
I'm used to YouTube strikes. And so we've covered a lot of stuff, and also there's a lot of stuff in this that for those who are paying attention and are students of history and look at this stuff uh, that look at Roman history, that look at the Civil War and what happened after the Civil War, Reconstruction, everything, that look at World War I and World War II and what happened post-war with the different trends. You can put a lot of stuff together and see a lot of stuff that's happening in huge culture wars that are going on and have been going on for the past at least 40 years for sure, if not longer, here in the U.S. And a lot of this stuff, people need to understand it and be able to see what's going on, but also understand, like the part that you talked about, if you're going to fight it, you have to have an army. You have to be able to um, be more than just talking shit on Twitter or whatever. Like you have to be able to.
Well, the problem is you can't do that now. You just can't, and which is why the only way to do it is with power. If you're going to use, you have to get power, and this street level violence and It's just not going to work. It, it's something that the left does, and the reason the left gets away with it is because they're in power. You know, if if the right wants to actually take to the streets and start destroying their enemies, they're going to need someone in power who's going to protect them, right?
Right. You have to.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the biggest lessons from all of those different events is the understanding of wielding of and or the understanding of capturing of and wielding of power and the importance of that, and everything else is it's principles and all of that are great if you don't care about power and actually not being under the boot that is going to grind you in, or under the heel that's going to grind you in until you have no identity left. And if you rise up from that, if you don't have power, then it will put you down and grind you in even further the next time. So yeah, the history lesson is find a way to be the one in power, be the heel. And maybe be a better heel, but also maybe not. Maybe fuck them.
Yeah, I mean, just be willing to just understand that you have enemies, and that, you know, our enemies are never going to stop.
Pete, I know you got you do a stream tomorrow. Go ahead and plug what you got going on, and I really appreciate it. This has been great. It's all of this stuff. Like I said, I tie this stuff all the way back to Rome, and you tie it all the way back to early 1800s, civil, leading up to civil. Like, there are so many connections throughout all of human history for all of this stuff that, like, we really need to be paying attention to what came before us. We should be burdened by some of that stuff from what came before. Sorry, Kamala. We do need to carry some of that burden of what was, because that's going to dictate how well we handle what is going to be coming down the road.
Well, my Spanish Civil War presentation starts in the 8th century, so, and the Spanish Civil War started in 1936, so yeah, it goes way back. But yeah, so yeah, I stream every Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern on YouTube, on Rumble, on Odyssey, and N to X if X works. Didn't work for me last week.
Yeah.
Also, the Quiñones show. I pretty much drop something new every day. PeteSubstack.com. I started doing video blogs 3 days a week, and
I'll never call it a vlog. Fuck that.
Vlog. It sounds like something out of Star Trek. But yeah, so I have a lot of stuff out there. Check me out.
Very cool. Thank you very much. As for me, I will be back. I'm working all this upcoming week. Hazard of not losing my job, as I actually have to go to it. But I'll be back on Tuesday, August the 6th, with Don the Pleb. We'll be talking about all of the crazy shit that happened over the past couple weeks, and recapping on some similar topics as what you and I talked about tonight. So thanks again, Pete. This has been great. For everybody who is watching, listening, go check out all of Pete's stuff. Excellent content every day. I highly recommend it. It should be on your daily reading list or watching list. In the meantime, I will see you here in about a week or so. Later.